there's a very particular kind of humiliation that doesn't just sting in the moment, it ferments. It sits behind your ribs and slowly turns into something heavier than anger, something sharper than heartbreak. And Mantan Suami sang Juru Selamat is basically two emotions braided together for 3 straight years, the ache of swallowing your pride, and the quiet, terrifying relief of finally deciding you're done swallowing. I'm talking about this one today on Bongo Gaming, and if you're into dramas where the nice guy finally stops being nice in the most controlled, surgical way possible, you're going to want to stay with me. And hey, if you like these long, story-first reviews where I actually sit with what the show is doing instead of speedrunning a plot recap, consider subscribing. Soft ask, no pressure. Also, I'm keeping spoilers light. I'm going to talk premise, tone, themes, and a couple of early turning point vibes you can feel coming, but I'm not going to dump big late game reveals or pretend I'm reading the last page of the book to you. This drama is built on the satisfaction of watching truth arrive, and I'm not about to steal that. So here's the core setup, and honestly it's already a full meal. Sion lives for 3 years as a son-in-law who's treated like dirt, looked down on, and tolerated at best. Not because he's weak, not because he doesn't know what's happening, because he's keeping a promise. And then the moment his wife kicks him out, he pulls back every layer of protection he's been quietly providing, reveals the truth publicly, and suddenly the family that made him small realizes they were standing on a floor he built. Too late. If that premise makes you go, okay, so it's going to be one of those regret the husband revenge arcs, yes. But what surprised me is how much the drama wants you to feel the cost of the waiting. It doesn't just treat those 3 years like a quick montage of suffering before the glow up. It lingers. It wants you to taste the blandness of being underestimated, the daily paper cuts of disrespect, the way a family can weaponize politeness into a cage. And that's the first thing that worked for me. It understands that humiliation isn't loud. It's routine. And let me tell you, routine is harder to watch than a single slap. A slap is one scene. Routine is a lifestyle. Routine is the way someone hands you a glass like you're the help, with a smile that dares you to complain. Routine is the way people forget to look you in the eye because, in their world, you're not a person with leverage, you're a person with obligations. This drama is obsessed with obligations. Promises. Debts. The moral math we do when we think we owe someone our silence. Now, before we go any further, I need you to sit with one question the show keeps poking at without always saying out loud: what kind of man stays in a place where he's not loved, not respected, and not even seen, for 3 years? Because the easy answer is a saint. The fun answer is a doormat. But the drama's answer is more interesting: a man with a plan, yes, but also a man with a wound. And that's where the whole thing starts to get quietly psychological, even when it's playing in the sandbox of big public reveals and regretful in-laws. Underneath the crowd-pleaser structure, there's this pulsing idea that Sion's promise isn't just a noble vow. It's also a way to control the chaos. If you can say, I'm staying because I promised, then you don't have to admit, I'm staying because leaving would mean accepting how little they value me. It's easier to be a martyr than it is to be a man who was fooled. And just wait until you notice how the show frames Sion in those early stretches, because it's not accidental, and it's not just sad husband lighting. The camera language does a lot of quiet work. He's often placed at the edge of rooms, not centered. He's in the shot, but he isn't the subject. There's a difference. When a family is talking and he's present, the blocking makes him look like furniture, useful, taken for granted, and easily replaced. It's subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is one of those dramas where the title is basically a spoiler and a promise at the same time. Ex-husband of the savior. That phrase carries 2 insults in it if you think about it. First, it reduces him to a relationship that ended. Second, it frames him as an accessory to someone else's heroism. He's not the savior. He's the ex of the savior. He's the footnote to their narrative. And the entire show is him taking a red pen to that footnote and rewriting the sentence. Here's my contrarian take early on, and I'm being serious: I don't actually think the most satisfying part of this drama is the revenge fantasy. I know, people come to these stories for the bowing and apologizing in the rain energy. But the real juice here is the restraint. The moments when Sion could explode and doesn't. The way he watches people reveal themselves when they think he can't do anything about it. Revenge is easy to write loud. Restraint is hard to write convincingly without making the character seem passive. This drama, at its best, threads that needle. And yes, there are times it flirts with making him too perfect. I'll get into that later because I have thoughts. But when it's working, it's not because Sion is a flawless chess master. It's because the show understands a simple human truth: the people who underestimate you will often document their own cruelty like it's nothing. They'll say the quiet parts out loud because they are so confident you can't touch them. That confidence is what makes the eventual public truth feel inevitable, like gravity, not like a plot twist. The other thing that hits is the class tension. This story only works if the wife's family is positioned above him socially or financially or reputationally, some kind of hierarchy where they believe they are doing him a favor by allowing him into the room. The show leans into that. You can feel the snobbery in the way scenes are staged, the household as a stage, Sion as a prop, the family as an audience that applauds itself. Even when no one is yelling, the air is thick with "know your place." And I'm going to be honest, I had a personal reaction to that which I didn't expect. There's a specific kind of dismissal that I'm extremely allergic to, the kind where someone speaks about you like you're not there. Or speaks for you like you're too dumb to represent yourself. And there were moments early on where I felt my shoulders tense up because it wasn't melodramatic cruelty, it was plausible cruelty. It was the cruelty of people who genuinely believe they are decent. That's the scariest kind. That's the kind that doesn't apologize because it doesn't even recognize it did anything wrong. If you've never been the outsider in a room full of people who already decided your value, this drama might feel like a heightened soap fantasy. If you have been that person, even once, there are scenes that land like a cold coin drop down your spine. And that's why I think newcomers to this genre might be surprised by how grounded the emotional mechanics are, even when the story engine is clearly built for payback. Now, because I'm keeping spoilers light, I'm not going to map out exact steps. But we all understand the shape of this arc. The first movement is endurance, Sion staying, being disrespected, being treated like a low-ranking employee in his own marriage. The second movement is rupture, he gets thrown out by his wife, and that's important because it's not him leaving. It's them discarding him. That difference matters. It flips the moral pressure. It takes him from, "Why are you still here?" to, "Why did you treat him like that?" The third movement is revelation, he retracts his protection and exposes truths in public. And what I appreciate is how the show makes that feel like a consequence, not a random twist. Because here's the thing, protection is a loaded word. The premise says he withdraws all his protection, and I love that the story chooses that phrasing. Protection implies he's been doing more than providing money or status. It implies he's been buffering them from consequences. It suggests he's been quietly holding up a wall so their enemies, their scandals, their bad decisions don't blow back on them. And if you're a family that thinks you're above someone, you'll never suspect he's the one keeping your roof from leaking. Let that sit for a second. The person you look down on might be the person preventing your collapse. That is deliciously ironic, yes, but it's also thematically clean. It's about invisible labor, emotional labor, social labor, strategic labor. The show is basically saying, you thought he was useless because you didn't understand his kind of usefulness. And that ties into the savior angle. The title positions Sion as connected to saving, right? But not in the heroic spotlight way. More like the uncredited engineer who built the bridge everyone drives over. You don't clap for the bridge until it's gone. Then you scream. There's also a fascinating moral tightrope here that I really hope viewers pay attention to. When you've been mistreated, do you owe the people who mistreated you any softness when you finally speak? Is exposing the truth automatically justice? Or can it become cruelty, too, just cruelty with a better soundtrack? This drama flirts with that question, and it's why I'm not just calling it a simple revenge candy bar. It wants to taste like something. And the show's pacing, at least in the early stretch, is patient in a way I didn't fully expect from this kind of title. Some dramas in this lane sprint to the big reveal because they know the audience is waiting to cheer. This one invests in mood. It invests in the small indignities. It lets the discomfort accumulate so that when Sion finally stands upright, you don't just think, finally. You feel it in your ribs. One thing I'll say right now, the actor playing Sion, because it lives or dies on him, has to sell a very specific combination of qualities. He can't just be sad. He can't just be cold. He needs to be controlled, observant, and quietly exhausted, with flashes of something sharper underneath. The performance style that works best here is micro-expression acting. The kind where a smile can be polite in shape but dead in the eyes. The kind where you can see him count to 3 before he answers, not because he's timid, but because he's choosing which version of himself to show. And when that's done well, it's electric. It creates this constant tension. Is he going to snap? Is he going to leave? Is he playing a long game or just surviving? The drama thrives on that ambiguity. Even when you know, intellectually, that the arc is heading toward a public reckoning, the scene-to-scene suspense comes from not knowing how long he'll keep the mask on. Here's a mini-scene that really captures what the drama is going for, and I'm describing it in the most general way possible because again, light spoilers. There's a moment around the kicked out portion of the premise where the space itself feels hostile. The house, this symbol of the family's status, suddenly stops being a home and becomes a border checkpoint. The sound design gets quieter in a way that makes you hear the little things, the drag of a suitcase wheel, the soft click of a door that might as well be a verdict, the way footsteps sound louder when you're walking away from something you once tried to belong to. And the camera doesn't rush it. It lingers in that hallway energy, that stale, over-air-conditioned emptiness that rich houses sometimes have on screen, beautiful and cold. People talk to him like he's a problem being removed, not a person being broken. And Sion, in that moment, isn't yelling. He's not begging. He's not doing the dramatic, "you'll regret this." He's doing something worse for them, he's going quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a decision being made behind your eyes. That's the scene language of a man pulling a pin out of a grenade and setting it gently on the table. And I'm telling you, if you've ever watched someone in real life go from trying to done, you know exactly what I mean. It's not a tantrum. It's a temperature change. That's what the show nails when it's at its best. The shift isn't loud. It's final. Now, some viewers are going to want the family to be cartoonishly evil. They want the easy hate. They want a parade of villains so the revenge feels clean. This is where I'm going to be slightly annoying as a reviewer. I actually prefer when the family isn't constantly screaming. The more believable they are, the more the drama cuts. The most infuriating antagonists are the ones who can justify themselves. The ones who can say, "We didn't mistreat you. We just had standards." The ones who call cruelty honesty, and call entitlement tradition. And from the premise, we know this family ends up regretting it, too late. That phrase, "Meniesel to Lambat," is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Regret isn't the same as accountability. Regret can be selfish. Regret can be about discomfort rather than conscience. And I think the drama plays with that, because when someone realizes the person they trampled was protecting them, their first feeling might not be shame. It might be fear. It might be, "Oh no, we're exposed." That's not remorse. That's panic. So I want to see the show, and from what's set up, it seems interested, distinguish between, "I'm sorry I hurt you," and, "I'm sorry the consequences are here." Those are not the same apology. One is human. The other is tactical. And speaking of tactical, the public truth part of the premise is fascinating because it implies Sion doesn't just confront them in private. He does it in a way that changes how other people see them. That's the ultimate power shift in these social status dramas. It's not about winning an argument at the dinner table. It's about rewriting the story the world believes about you. That's why the public angle is so potent. People like this, families obsessed with image, don't fear morality. They fear embarrassment. They don't fear being wrong. They fear being seen as wrong. If the drama is smart, and I think it is at least intermittently smart, it will use that public reveal not just as a gotcha, but as a commentary on performative respectability. Because the family's cruelty probably wasn't hidden. It was just acceptable within their circle. And that's a real thing. A lot of people don't get away with cruelty. They get applauded for it. They get called strong and discerning. Until the narrative flips. Then everyone suddenly acts shocked. Let me rehook you here with a thought that kept me watching even when some scenes felt like they were taking their time. Pay attention to who the drama frames as an audience inside the story. Who's watching Sion? Who's watching the family? Who's witnessing the humiliation? Because the show is building a courtroom out of society, and the final verdict depends on who's in the seats. One of the biggest challenges for a story like this is not making Sion's suffering feel repetitive. 3 years is a long time, and if the drama just stacks insult on insult without emotional evolution, it can start to feel like misery wallpaper. The way to avoid that is to make each humiliation reveal a new layer, not just, they are mean, but this is how they rationalize being mean, or this is how his wife participates, or this is the moment he loses faith, or this is the moment he starts planning. The wife's role is the most delicate part, in my opinion. Because the premise says she kicks him out. That is an enormous character choice. It automatically makes her complicit, not just the family. And dramas like this sometimes try to soften the wife later by blaming misunderstandings or manipulation, but the initial wound is still there. She chose to discard him. What I hope the show does, and again, light spoilers, so I'm talking craft hopes rather than claiming specifics, is let her be complicated without absolving her. Let her have reasons without turning them into excuses. If she's pressured by family, show the pressure. If she's blinded by pride, show the pride. If she's genuinely convinced Sion is lesser, let that be an ugly truth rather than a temporary glitch. Because the story is stronger when the heartbreak is real. Not just evil in-laws, but the person you vowed with didn't protect you. That's a different pain. That's a more intimate betrayal. And that's what makes the ex-husband part sting. Not man rejected by society. Man rejected by the one person who was supposed to be his home. There's a small detail in these kinds of dramas that separates the good ones from the junk food, and it's whether the lead's patience feels like agency or like plot convenience. If Sion is patient because the script needs him to be patient, it feels artificial. If he's patient because he's making an active, morally loaded choice, because of a promise, then it becomes character. Then every quiet moment carries tension, because you can feel the choice pressing against him. And I think the show mostly lands on the second. The promise is the spine. It's a narrative device, yes, but it's also a thematic anchor. It forces you to ask, what do we owe the dead? What do we owe the living? What do we owe ourselves? Because keeping a promise can be beautiful. It can also be self-erasure. And watching Sion erase himself for 3 years is painful in a way that sneaks up on you. I had one of those moments watching where I caught myself thinking, why is he still doing this, and then immediately felt kind of gross about my own thought. Because that's what people say to victims of slow disrespect. Why didn't you leave earlier? As if leaving is a simple door you open. The drama pokes that reflex. It doesn't preach, but it puts you in the discomfort of judging him, and then it reminds you, you don't know what he's carrying. You don't know what that promise means to him. And when the show finally moves toward him removing his protection, it doesn't feel like, oh, now the plot starts. It feels like a man finally choosing himself, maybe for the first time in years. Let's talk visuals for a second, because even in a premise-driven drama, the look matters. The show's strongest visual instinct is contrast. Warmth versus cold. Public versus private. The family's polished surfaces versus Sion's inner mess. You can tell the director understands that status is a visual language, bright, clean interiors, symmetrical framing, people sitting higher than others, conversations staged like meetings. Sion's presence disrupts that symmetry, especially when he's being ignored. He becomes this asymmetrical element the frame doesn't know how to center, until later, when he takes control, and suddenly he's shot differently. That shift, when it's done right, is goosebump material. A character doesn't need a new haircut to glow up. Sometimes all they need is for the camera to finally admit they've been the main character the entire time. The editing rhythm also matters, and what I noticed is the show likes to let uncomfortable beats breathe. It doesn't always cut away quickly after a slight. Sometimes it stays on Sion's face half a second longer than you expect. That half second is where the story lives. That's where you watch the calculus, swallow it or bite back. Smile or stare. Apologize or leave. In real life, those decisions happen in tiny pauses. The drama respects that. Music-wise, it uses score like a pressure system. It's not constantly blaring, revenge theme, at you, thank God. When it's effective, it leans into understated tension, low, sustained notes that don't tell you what to feel, they tell you something is coming. And the smartest choice the show makes is sometimes using near silence. Silence is power in these stories. Silence is what Sion has been forced into, and silence is what he weaponizes later. When the show lets a scene play without a manipulative swell, it feels more confident. But I'm not going to pretend it's perfect. Even in the early premise zone, you can feel the genre gears turning. There are moments where the disrespect feels a little too neatly arranged, like the family is lining up to audition for Worst People Alive. And look, I get it. This is a mainstream drama, it wants to hook you fast. But the more it leans into, everyone is awful to him all the time, the less special each moment becomes. The best villainy is specific. The best cruelty is personalized. It knows where to aim. If every character is mean in the same way, the show risks flattening its own conflict. The premise already gives you a strong foundation, 3 years of being looked down on. It doesn't need to stack 10 extra toppings of nonsense to make us hate them. We're already seated. We already ordered. Here's another thought to keep you with me, the real conflict in this drama isn't, can Sion get revenge? The real conflict is, what does Sion become once he stops protecting them? Because protection isn't just something you give. It becomes part of your identity. If he's been the unseen shield for years, removing that shield is also removing the role that gave his suffering meaning. That's a psychological cliff. And stories like this are at their most interesting when they don't treat revenge as pure catharsis, but as transformation. There's also a romance question hovering over everything: can love survive contempt? And I mean contempt from either side. Because when you're treated like you're beneath someone for long enough, you don't just get hurt, you start to change how you see them. You start to see them as small. You start to see them as predictable. And once that happens, even if they apologize later, you might not be able to unsee it. That's the tragedy potential here. The premise promises regret from the ex-wife's family, and likely from the ex-wife too. But regret doesn't rewind time. Regret doesn't restore innocence. Regret doesn't say words. The drama is positioned to make that point land hard. You can't break what you broke just because you finally noticed it was valuable. And I have to give credit to the show for how it frames Sion's dignity as something separate from wealth or status. The easy version of this story is, he was secretly rich, and they were foolish not to respect his bank account. That's a very common trope. It can be fun, sure, but it's also shallow if it's the only thing. This drama, based on the premise, makes his protection the key, not just his money. Protection implies strategy, influence, maybe competence. It implies he's been doing something that requires intelligence. And that's a more satisfying power fantasy, because it suggests they didn't misjudge his wallet, they misjudged his capability. They misjudged his mind. That's why the public truth reveal matters. It's not just, surprise, I'm powerful. It's, surprise, I've been powerful, and you still chose to treat me like trash. That's the kind of reveal that makes antagonists look not just cruel, but stupid. And there's a special satisfaction in that. Now, I want to talk about Sion as a character beyond the premise, but carefully, because we don't have a ton of specific plot detail beyond the arc shape. What we do know is he's a promise keeper. And that trait can be heroic or self-destructive depending on how the drama frames it. The most interesting version of Sion is not a flawless saint. It's someone who clings to promises because he needs them. Because they make the world feel orderly. Because they let him convert pain into purpose. If the show leans into that, it becomes more than a revenge tale. It becomes a story about identity. Who are you when you're no longer the one who endures? Who are you when the role that kept you stable is gone? When he retracts protection, does he feel free, or does he feel empty? And there's a line the drama is walking, again, genre-wise, between empowerment and humiliation porn. Some shows in this lane overindulge in degrading the lead just to make the audience thirstier for payback. That can backfire. It can start to feel exploitative, like the character's pain exists for your entertainment rather than for a meaningful arc. Mantan Suami sang Juru Selamat mostly avoids that trap by giving Sion a sense of internal life. Even when he's outwardly polite, you can sense thought behind his eyes. The show doesn't treat him like a punching bag, it treats him like a coiled spring. And that distinction matters. When he's disrespected, the camera often checks in with him, not to watch him suffer, but to watch him note it. To watch him remember. Because memory is the weapon in this story. The family forgets their cruelty the moment it leaves their mouths. Sion doesn't have that luxury. He carries it. He catalogs it. And then, later, the public truth is basically his ledger being read aloud. Let me do a quick aside, because I know how YouTube comments can get. Yes, I'm aware that, just leave, is the rational advice in real life. In fiction, staying is the engine. But the reason the staying works here is because it's rooted in a promise. The drama gives you a moral hook, not just a plot excuse. And that makes the eventual break feel like something earned rather than delayed for episode count. Another thing I enjoyed, and this is a small craft compliment but I mean it, is how the show uses the concept of being seen. The family doesn't see him. Not really. They see what they want, the dependent, a convenient husband, a low-status accessory. The public reveal is, in a sense, Sion forcing the world to see him. There's a deep human hunger in that. Being seen after years of being treated as invisible. And okay, here comes my personal confession moment, because it's relevant. I've had periods in my own life where I was the reliable one, the one who kept things running, the one who smoothed over problems so others wouldn't panic. And I didn't do it because I was asked nicely. I did it because I thought that was love. I thought, if I make myself useful enough, I'll be valued. Watching Sion endure that same dynamic, usefulness mistaken for worthlessness, hit a nerve. Not in a melodramatic way. In a quiet, embarrassing way. Like catching your reflection in a dark window and realizing you've been negotiating for basic respect. So when he finally stops protecting them, it doesn't just read as revenge. It reads as boundary. And boundary stories are always emotional for me, because they force you to confront the part of yourself that tolerated too much. Now, let's talk about the ex-wife's family, because they are more than just antagonists, they are a system. They represent how people treat someone when they think that person can't fight back. And what's delicious is that their power is borrowed. It's performative. It's upheld by social agreement. As long as everyone agrees the family is untouchable, they are untouchable. Sion's public truth reveal threatens the agreement. Once the story about them changes, the power drains out like air from a balloon. That's why these public downfall arcs are so satisfying, they expose how fragile arrogance is. Arrogance is loud, but it's not strong. It's a paper crown. And the moment someone names it, it starts to crumple. But the show also has to be careful not to make the family's regret too easy. I don't want, "Oops, we misjudged you, please come back." I want the drama to sit in the consequences. If Sion has been protecting them, and he stops, that means people get hurt. It means something collapses. It means safety nets vanish. And then the question becomes, is Sion responsible for what happens when he stops saving people who never thanked him? That's morally thorny, and thorny is good. Because if the show just treats it as, they deserve it, it becomes simplistic. But if it makes you feel the satisfaction and the discomfort at the same time, if it makes you go, yes, but also, wow, then it becomes memorable. And I'll tell you, the best scenes in dramas like this aren't the big speeches. They are the scenes where the antagonists realize, quietly, that something is wrong. The moment the family tries to flex and the world doesn't respond the way it used to. The moment a call goes unanswered. The moment a door that always opened doesn't open. The moment they look around and realize the room is colder, emptier, less obedient. If Mantan Suami sang Juru Selamat delivers those moments with patience, it's going to be addictive. Let me rehook you again with a promise of a different kind. The most interesting relationship in this drama might not be Sion versus the family. It might be Sion versus his own self-image. Because once you stop being the person who endures, you have to face what you were enduring for. And that's where the story can either get profound, or chicken out. There's also something to be said about masculinity in this story. A lot of dramas treat male pride as either toxic or heroic. This one is doing something more nuanced. Sion's pride isn't loud. He doesn't demand respect with force. His pride is in his promise, his discipline, his ability to hold back. That's a different kind of masculinity, one built on control rather than domination. But the flip side is that control can become a prison. If you're always controlling yourself, you never get to be cared for. You never get to be soft. You never get to say, "This hurts." You just become a container for pain. And the show hints at that vulnerability under the stoic surface, which makes him more human. I want to shout out the line delivery style that works in these scenes. When Sion speaks, it shouldn't sound like a hero monologue. It should sound like someone choosing words carefully because words have consequences. And in the early stretch, his lines, when the acting is right, feel measured. There's this sensation that he's constantly editing himself in real time, which is what people do when they're in hostile environments. They become their own censor. The wife, similarly, if the performance is layered, should not be played as a mustache-twirling villain. The most believable version is someone who thinks she's being reasonable. Someone who's irritated by him in a way that's almost casual, because contempt has become normal. That kind of performance is chilling because it mirrors real-life emotional neglect. Sometimes people don't hurt you because they hate you. They hurt you because they don't care enough to be careful. And that's why, kicked out, is such a loaded phrase. Getting kicked out isn't just being told to leave. It's being told you were never home. Okay, I want to slow down and talk about the promise for a second, because it's the most important story tool here and it can be interpreted in a few ways. The premise says, Demi menepati janji, to keep a promise, he lived as a looked-down-upon son-in-law for 3 years. So the promise likely predates the marriage situation, or at least predates the misery. It might be tied to gratitude, to someone who helped him, to a debt he feels he must repay. And what that does, narratively, is chain him to a family that doesn't deserve him, not because he's naive, but because he's loyal. Loyalty is beautiful until it becomes self-harm. And the drama's central tension is essentially, when does loyalty become betrayal of the self? If you're someone who has ever been loyal to the wrong people, family, friends, workplaces, this drama is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. It might even make you angry at Sion at times, because you'll want him to choose himself sooner. But that frustration is part of the experience. The show wants you to want freedom for him. It wants you to feel the weight of 3 years. Because 3 years is not just some time. It's seasons changing. It's birthdays passing. It's waking up and doing the same performance again and again. It's losing parts of yourself in tiny increments. And when you finally break, it's not one big decision. It's 1,000 tiny decisions finally tipping over. The public reveal, then, is not the beginning of his story. It's the end of his patience. And I think that's why the drama title is clever. It implies that in the eyes of the public, he's already defined by what he used to be, the ex-husband. It suggests that even when the truth comes out, people may still initially frame it through gossip rather than justice. That's realistic. Society loves a narrative more than it loves a person. People will reduce him to a label before they understand what he did. So when he reveals the truth in public, it's not just about punishing the family. It's about reclaiming narrative control. It's about refusing to be summarized incorrectly. Now, there are a couple of potential pitfalls the show has to avoid in order to stick the landing later, and I'm bringing them up now because they affect how you experience the early episodes or early stretch. One pitfall is making Sion too omnipotent. If he's been protecting them, and he can remove that protection like flipping a switch, the show needs to make that believable in the emotional logic of its world. Protection can mean influence, connections, shielding reputations, fine. But it has to feel earned, not magical. The second pitfall is the instant regret syndrome. Sometimes these stories have the family go from cruel to sobbing overnight, and it kills the realism. Regret takes time, and more importantly, it usually arrives in stages: denial, irritation, bargaining, blame shifting, then finally, maybe remorse. I want the drama to make them squirm, not just cry. Because if they cry too soon, it feels like the show is chasing sympathy for them. And personally, I'm not here for sympathy before accountability. I can empathize with human beings, sure. But I don't want the narrative to hold their hand on the way to apologizing. They had 3 years to be decent. And this is where my critical edge comes out a little. 3 years is such an extreme duration that the story has to justify why Sion stayed beyond promise. Promise alone might not satisfy every viewer. The drama needs to show that leaving earlier would have broken something significant, morally, emotionally, practically. If it nails that, the story feels tragic and noble. If it doesn't, some viewers might feel like the suffering was stretched for effect. So far, based on the premise and the way the arc is positioned, I'm willing to go with it because the promise is framed as a serious moral anchor, not a casual excuse. But it's something I kept watching for. Does the show respect the 3-year claim, or does it treat it like a dramatic number? Because here's the difference. If 3 years is respected, you feel history in every interaction. You feel fatigue in Sion's posture. You feel that the family's contempt is habitual. If it's not respected, it'll feel like, they were mean yesterday and today, and also it's been 3 years, trust us. The writing has to do the work. And speaking of writing, what I appreciated is how the premise inherently creates built-in irony. Irony is fuel. The family thinks they are powerful, actually they are protected. The wife thinks she's discarding dead weight, actually she's cutting off a lifeline. The public thinks they know the story, actually they only know the family's PR version. Sion looks like the loser, actually he's the one with the receipts. Receipt energy is the lifeblood of this genre, and the best versions of this trope don't just dump receipts, they paste them. They let you feel the dread build in the antagonists as they realize the past is not gone. It's just been waiting. Let me bring in another sensory little description, because this is how the show got under my skin. There's a texture to the humiliation scenes that feels intentionally repetitive. The same kinds of rooms. The same polite gatherings. The same smiles that don't reach the eyes. And the repetition starts to feel like a trap, like Sion is caught in a loop. When he's finally kicked out, it feels like the loop breaks. The color palette, the air, even the soundscape seems to shift. The drama uses that shift to signal, we are not in endurance mode anymore. And I'm telling you, the first time you feel that tonal shift as a viewer, it's like taking your hand off a hot stove. You didn't realize how tense you were until you weren't. Now, I know a lot of people come to these revenge, regret dramas for the face-slapping moments, literal or metaphorical. And I'm not judging. Sometimes you want to watch a bully get humbled. Sometimes that's medicine. But I want to highlight that Mantan Suami sang Juru Selamat seems less interested in physical spectacle and more interested in reputational collapse. That's a different flavor. It's social. It's strategic. It's about who holds the microphone. And if you've ever watched someone get exposed publicly, like truly exposed, not cancelled for a week, but exposed in a way that changes how everyone treats them, it's terrifying. The show plays with that fear. The family's regret isn't just emotional. It's existential. Their world depends on people believing they are respectable. If that belief cracks, everything cracks. Here's where the savior part of the title becomes extra interesting. If Sion is the one protecting them, then in a twisted way, he has been their savior. not the wife, not the family patriarch or whoever runs the show. Sion. He's been saving people who despise him. That's almost biblical in its irony. And when he stops, he's not just punishing them, he's refusing to be their savior anymore. That refusal is powerful because it's not an attack. It's an absence. It's him stepping away and letting them face what they've earned. And there's something emotionally satisfying about that kind of revenge because it doesn't require Sion to become monstrous. He doesn't have to invent cruelty. He just has to stop preventing consequences. That's why I said earlier that the real interesting part isn't revenge, it's boundary. The show is about what happens when someone stops being a cushion. Let me rehook you one more time, because this is where the drama's craft either clicks for you or it doesn't. If the show can make you feel conflicted, cheering for Sion while also mourning what he lost during those 3 years, then it's doing something real. If you're only cheering, it's candy. If you're cheering and grieving, it's a meal. I also want to talk about how the public reveal is likely staged. At least in terms of dramatic language, because even without specifics you can sense the intention. Truth in front of the public scene is rarely just someone talking. It's usually a performance of power reversal. The camera will likely shift from tight close-ups of Sion being dismissed to wider shots where people are forced to listen. The sound design will likely drop out the background chatter. The edit will likely cut to reactions, faces that used to smirk now frozen. Reaction shots are currency in this genre. The show has to spend them wisely. Too many reaction shots and it becomes cheesy. Too few and you don't get the payoff. The best version is when the reactions are not exaggerated but specific, the moment someone's throat tightens, the moment someone's eyes dart because they are calculating, the moment someone tries to interrupt and realizes they can't. And Sion, in that moment, has to be played not like a triumphant villain, but like someone who has finally stopped asking for permission to exist. If the actor can play that with calm intensity, it's magnetic. If he plays it with smugness, it risks making him less sympathetic. Because here's the tricky part, viewers will forgive a lot from Sion because he was wronged. But the drama still has to keep him emotionally coherent. If he becomes cruel just because the plot wants him to win, it might feel satisfying for a second, but it empties the story. The strongest version of Sion's power is dignity, not sadism. Now, I've been praising the restraint, but I'm not blind to the fact that the premise is a fantasy. In real life, people who are mistreated by powerful families don't always get a clean, public vindication. That's why these dramas exist. They are moral rebalancing fantasies. They let us imagine a world where the truth actually matters, where consequences show up on time, where the person who was ignored gets the microphone. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I'd argue it's one of the healthiest uses of melodrama. It's emotional justice. It's wish fulfillment with a backbone. But I do want to see the show earn its fantasy by making the emotional work feel real. The more real the pain feels, the more cathartic the fantasy becomes. If the pain feels fake, the catharsis feels cheap. So far, the premise gives it the raw materials for something intense, a man who endured 3 years for a promise, then is discarded, then chooses to reveal truth publicly. That's a clean arc with huge emotional potential. The question is how it handles the in-between. Because the in-between is where audiences decide if they care. Let's zoom in on the phrase, mantu yang dipandang rendah, the look down upon son-in-law. That's not just an insult. That's a social role, especially in stories that care about family hierarchy. The son-in-law is often treated like an outsider who must prove his worth. And if the family is status-obsessed, the son-in-law becomes a convenient scapegoat. Someone to blame when things go wrong. Someone to belittle to reinforce the family's internal pecking order. Sion's existence in that house probably serves a psychological purpose for them. He's the lower person they can step on so they can feel higher. That's why his removal later shakes them, they lose their emotional punching bag. And they lose their shield. Double loss. And there's a quiet satisfaction in imagining a family like that suddenly having to face each other without Sion as the buffer. Because families that bully outsiders often have rot inside. The outsider just gives them a target so they don't have to confront their own dysfunction. When the outsider leaves, the rock becomes visible. I want the drama to go there. I want it to show that Sion wasn't just protecting them from external consequences, he was protecting them from themselves. He was absorbing their toxicity so they didn't have to choke on it. And that's where the savior theme becomes tragic. Being a savior can be a form of self-destruction. Saving people who don't love you is a special kind of loneliness. Okay, quick palate cleanser aside, because I've been intense, there is a petty joy in these stories that I can't pretend I'm above. When a character who's been smug for ages suddenly can't finish their sentence because reality just entered the room. When their voice gets smaller. When they suddenly remember manners. I'm human. I enjoy it. I'm not made of enlightenment. But the drama's best moments, I think, will be the ones that don't just humiliate the family, they clarify Sion. They show you who he is when he's no longer cornered. That's why I'm curious about what truth means here. The premise says he reveals the truth to the public. Truth about what? We're not told, and I'm not going to invent specifics. But whatever it is, it has to be something that reframes the last 3 years. Something that makes the audience inside the story, and the audience at home, go, oh. That's why. And that, oh, is everything. It's the sound of a puzzle clicking. It's the sound of contempt turning into confusion. It's the sound of regret being born. And if you're a newcomer to dramas like this, that's the high you're chasing, the moment when the people who thought they knew the story realize they didn't even read the right genre. Now, I want to touch on the concept of public versus private self, because Sion's arc is basically that. In private, he's enduring. In public, he's likely invisible or dismissed. The reveal flips that, in public, he becomes undeniable. That's not just a plot twist, it's an identity shift. It's him moving from private suffering to public agency. And that shift can be dangerous. Because once your pain becomes public, people start having opinions about it. People start choosing sides. People start turning your life into entertainment. The drama, if it's sharp, will acknowledge that public vindication isn't purely comforting. It can be invasive. It can be alienating. It can make you feel like your trauma is a spectacle. Even if the show doesn't go deep into that angle, it's part of the subtext, and it's why the public truth device is so powerful. It's justice, but it's also exposure. Sion is not just exposing them, he's exposing himself. He's stepping into a spotlight he didn't ask for. And the performance has to carry that. The actor has to show not just triumph, but the cost of stepping forward. Because when you've been invisible for years, being seen can feel like standing naked in a crowded room. Let me rehook you again with something I think a lot of people will argue about in the comments. If the wife and her family regret it, do they deserve forgiveness? Not, do they get forgiven, because that's Sion's choice. But do they deserve it narratively? The show is going to tempt you with tears and apologies. The question is whether it earns them. I have my own bias here. I'm tough on characters who had years to be kind and chose not to. A single mistake, sure. A pattern? A lifestyle? That's harder. And 3 years is a lifestyle. But I'm also not allergic to redemption arcs when they are written honestly. The only kind I can't stand is the shortcut redemption, where one big apology scene is treated like a magical reset button. Real remorse is slow. It's humiliating. It requires the person to sit in discomfort without demanding comfort. If the family's regret is just them wanting Sion back because they need his protection, that's not redemption, that's dependency. And that's why I'm so interested in how the drama distinguishes regret from love. Regret can look like love when you're desperate. But it isn't. Let's talk about narrative satisfaction, because this is a drama that is obviously built to satisfy. There's a reason these stories are popular. People want to watch an underdog who was dismissed reveal their true value. It's a fantasy of being recognized. It's also a fantasy of consequences being fair. But the best versions of this trope don't just give you the high, they give you the hangover. They show you that even when you win, you lost time. You lost innocence. You lost softness. You lost years you can't get back. And Sion's 3 years are the hangover waiting to happen. If the show is brave, it won't pretend that vindication heals everything. It will let Sion still be wounded even after he's powerful. It will let him be angry in a way that isn't pretty. It will let him be tired. Because that's what makes him human. That's what separates a character from a symbol. Now, I'm going to pivot slightly to talk about what didn't work for me in the early going, because I don't want to be that reviewer who only claps. The premise is strong, but the drama risks leaning too heavily on the "everyone underestimates him" button. When every single person in a scene treats Sion like he's nothing, it starts to feel staged. In real life, even in toxic families, there's usually one person who's awkwardly neutral, one person who's quietly sympathetic, one person who avoids conflict. A whole group being uniformly contemptuous can become less believable unless the show gives you a reason for that groupthink. And maybe it does later, but the early vibe can sometimes feel like the writers are painting with a thick brush. It's effective for immediate emotion, but it can flatten the social realism. The other risk is making Sion's promise feel too vague. A promise is powerful, but it's also a blank check if the writing never interrogates it. I want the drama to explore what that promise meant, why it mattered, why it bound him. Not necessarily with a long flashback or exposition dump, but with character behavior. With a look. With a line that hints at history. Because otherwise the promise becomes a convenient leash rather than a meaningful bond. But despite those concerns, I kept watching because the emotional engine is clean. You understand the injustice. You understand the power imbalance. You understand what Sion stands to gain by finally stepping out of the role they forced him into. That clarity is important. A lot of dramas try to be twisty and forget to be clear. This one is clear. It knows what it is. And that's why the public truth moment, whenever it comes in the structure, feels like an event rather than a gimmick. The show is building toward a release valve. I want to zoom back into the idea of protection, because it can mean a lot of things, and the drama is smart to keep it broad. Protection can be financial backing, yes. It can also be reputation management, shielding from enemies, handling legal messes, taking blame, making problems disappear before they become public. Protection is invisible work that allows powerful people to remain powerful without getting their hands dirty. If Sion has been doing that kind of work, then his removal is not just a divorce-level personal rupture. It's a systemic destabilization. It means the family's smooth surface starts cracking. And here's the emotional kicker: they didn't just mistreat him. They mistreated the person who was saving them. That's not just cruel, it's self-destructive. And self-destructive antagonists are the best because their downfall feels like a natural consequence of their own arrogance, not like the writer's hand smiting them. So yes, you'll probably watch this drama for the "they regretted it too late" satisfaction. But the reason it might stick in your memory is because it's also about how people create their own disasters through entitlement. Let me rehook one more time by pointing at something you might not notice until you do. Watch how often Sion is forced to prove himself in small ways early on. Proving is a trap. The moment you accept the role of proving your worth, you've already agreed you might be worthless. Sion's arc is him refusing that premise. And that's why being kicked out is ironically the best thing that happens to him in the story's logic. It's brutal, yes. It's humiliating, yes. But it frees him from the proving game. It removes the last excuse he had to stay. It turns his promise from a chain into a completed sentence. I stayed as long as I had to. Now I'm done. There's something almost spiritual about that kind of closure. Not forgiving. Not forgetting. Just ending the obligation. And if you're someone who has ever stayed too long, at a job, in a relationship, in a family dynamic, because you felt you owed it, you might find yourself unexpectedly emotional when Sion finally steps away. Not because the scene is manipulative, but because it symbolizes something we all fantasize about: the clean exit. The moment where you stop negotiating your dignity. I'll say this too, The title being in Indonesian gives the whole thing a certain cadence, certain melodramatic elegance, but the emotional beats are universal. Disrespect, promises, power, public image, those themes travel. And for an English-speaking audience discovering it fresh, it plays like a classic moral reversal story with a contemporary edge. One more craft note before I land this section of the review: the show's tension depends on timing. When does Sion stop protecting them? When does the public truth come out? If those beats are rushed, the satisfaction is shallow. If they're delayed too long, the audience gets impatient. The drama has to surf that line. From the premise alone, you can sense the structure is designed to give you endurance first, then rupture, then revelation. The question is how it keeps each phase interesting. For me, the answer is character texture. If the show invests in Sion's internal shifts, his evolving gaze, his diminishing patience, his growing clarity, then even the slow scenes will feel like movement. Because movement isn't always plot. Sometimes movement is a man realizing he deserves better. And right now, that's the point I'm most locked into, not the revenge, not the regret, not even the public spectacle. The moment Sion decides, privately, that he's done being their savior. Because everything after that is just the world catching up to a decision that's already been made in his heart, and the drama's ability to make that decision feel inevitable is what separates a satisfying watch from a forgettable one. So with that in mind, let's talk about how the drama frames Sion's done energy, because the shift isn't just written, it's acted and shot and paced, and there's a particular kind of cold calm the story is building toward where even his silence starts to feel like a statement, and the more you notice it, the more you realize the family has been mistaking quiet for weakness, when really it was discipline waiting for a reason to stop being kind. And that's where the tension starts to get really interesting, because you can feel the room change around him when he no longer tries to make it comfortable for them, when he no longer smooths the air with politeness, when he just lets their words hang there like smoke and watches them breathe it in, because the second he stops absorbing their toxicity, they are forced to taste it themselves, and the show lingers in that uncomfortable space where nobody knows what to do next, and you can almost hear the unspoken question forming in their minds as they look at him like they've never really looked at him before, and they're about to realize that he's the axis, not the accessory. And it's such a deliciously uncomfortable realization because it doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives with confusion. It arrives with that tiny flicker behind someone's eyes when they're trying to recategorize you and none of their old folders fit anymore. One of my favorite things in dramas like this is the exact moment the power dynamic loses its rhythm. You know that rhythm, right? The rich family says something sharp, the low person laughs politely, everyone moves on, the family feels superior, scene ends. Mantan Suami sang Juru Selamat starts breaking that rhythm the second Sion stops reacting the way they trained him to react. The absence of his compliance becomes the loudest sound in the room. And that's when you can feel the family getting restless, because bullies don't just enjoy cruelty, they enjoy control. If you stop giving them the reaction they want, you're already resisting. There's a particular kind of acting choice that sells this, and it's not about raising your voice. It's about eye contact. When Sion finally starts holding eye contact for half a beat longer than socially comfortable, it reads as threat without being theatrical. It reads as, I heard you. I understood you. And I'm not going to fix the discomfort you just created. That is power. Not because it's aggressive, but because it's self-contained. And the family, if the actors are doing their job, should look slightly wrong-footed. Not frightened yet. Not humbled yet. Just thrown off. Like they expected a door to be where it always is, and they reached out and grabbed air. Those are the micro moments that make this kind of story addictive, because you start scanning every interaction for the next crack in the facade. The wife's role in those cracks is where the show can get really interesting, and also where it can fumble if it chooses convenience over complexity. Because when a spouse kicks you out, the betrayal isn't just that they sided with their family. The betrayal is that they refused to be your witness. They refused to look at what was happening and say, no. Not to him. In stories like this, I'm always watching for whether the wife is written as someone who never noticed, someone who noticed and rationalized, or someone who noticed and enjoyed the power. Those are three very different moral portraits, and they each demand a different kind of aftermath. If she never noticed, the show risks insulting the audience's intelligence. If she noticed and rationalized, then her regret later has to include self-disgust, not just sadness. If she noticed and enjoyed, then we're in darker territory, and her regret becomes less about love and more about losing. And even without the drama spelling it out in neon, the premise already implies she's not innocent. She didn't just fail to protect him, she actively removed him. That's a deliberate decision. So if the show later wants to soften her, it needs to do it honestly. Not with a sudden saint edit, but with a slow unpeeling of why she became that person. Here's a respectful but pointed thought: audiences are often way too quick to forgive a character just because the actor can cry prettily. And this drama, by design, is going to test that reflex. Because if the family and the ex-wife start regretting things too late, the show is basically asking you, how late is too late? Not just for reconciliation, but for basic decency. And wait, this is where the public truth element complicates everything in a way I really like, because public truth doesn't just punish the family. It also strips away private negotiation. Once something is public, you can't quietly patch it up without social consequences. The wife can't just say, "Let's talk." The family can't just offer a deal. Their image becomes part of the conflict, and suddenly their preferred battlefield, private control, doesn't exist anymore. The show is essentially taking people who thrive in closed rooms and forcing them into open air. If you've ever had to confront someone who only behaves nicely when there are witnesses, you understand why that matters. Some people are only ethical when they are observed. So putting truth in public is not just revenge, it's protection for Sion. It means the family can't gaslight him as easily. They can't rewrite the story in private if the world has heard it. That's why, even with light spoilers, I can say the public reveal is likely to be the dramatic centerpiece, not because it's flashy, but because it changes the rules of engagement. It takes the story from family drama to social judgment. And that's also where direction and editing become make or break. The public truth scene, however it's staged, has to feel like a release of pressure that's been building for years. If it's cut too quickly, it'll feel like a TikTok clip, satisfying for 5 seconds, then gone. If it's allowed to unfold with control, pauses, reaction shots used sparingly, the right kind of sonic drop, it can feel like a dam breaking. I want to talk about the sound design again because this drama uses silence like a weapon, and I don't say that lightly. In many mainstream dramas, there's a fear of silence. They fill every moment with music, with chatter, with emotional cues. This one, when it trusts itself, lets the air hang. You can hear the tension. You can hear how a room changes when people realize they might be the ones exposed next. And speaking of exposure, the premise's phrase, "Menkabat seluruh pelindungannya," removing all his protection, suggests there's a systematic unmasking happening, not a single gotcha. That's important. A single gotcha can feel petty. A systematic removal feels like consequence. It feels like Sion isn't just lashing out, he's reclaiming control over resources he never should have been forced to provide for people who despised him. That's where the writing can really win me over, because it's one thing to have a character deliver a satisfying speech. It's another thing to show, through choices and cause and effect, that power has been misallocated all along. Now, I'm going to plant a slightly uncomfortable idea, and you can tell me if you agree in the comments later, because this is genuinely something I wrestle with. Sometimes, the promise that keeps a character trapped isn't the noblest thing about them. Sometimes it's their biggest flaw. Sometimes it's pride in disguise. Like, think about it. If you tell yourself, "I have to keep my promise no matter what," there's an ego hidden in that. There's an identity, "I am the kind of person who never breaks a vow." That can be admirable, yes. But it can also become a way to avoid admitting you stayed too long because you were hoping the people who hurt you would finally choose you. And I'm not accusing Sion of that definitively, because we're not inventing details. But the premise gives enough emotional space for that interpretation to exist, and it's what makes him more compelling than a generic revenge lead. If he's purely noble, he's a symbol. If he's noble and also a little trapped by his own self-image, then he's human. And the reason that matters is because when he finally breaks away, it's not just a plot switch. It's a psychological breakthrough. It's him letting go of the identity that kept him stable but miserable. If you're still with me, here's the question that kept me watching through the more repetitive humiliation beats: what does Sion actually want, beneath revenge? Not what the plot wants, not what the genre promises. What does he want? Does he want love? Respect? Peace? Recognition? Or does he want them to hurt the way he hurt? And the answer determines whether this becomes a story that leaves a mark or just a binge you forget. This is also where cinematography can do a sneaky amount of storytelling. When Sion is in endurance mode, the framing often makes him look small in big spaces. Wide shots, lots of negative space, other characters occupying the visual center. The moment he shifts into "I'm done," the camera starts treating him differently. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be as simple as moving him to center frame, or giving him the cleanest, most stable shot in the scene while others are shot with slight handheld jitter. Stability reads as control. Jitter reads as uncertainty. You can literally feel power through the lens. And if you don't consciously notice any of that, that's fine. The point is you feel it. You feel when a drama starts honoring a character. You feel when it stops treating them like background noise. There's also a color story that often shows up in these social status dramas, and while I won't claim specific palettes, the general tactic is clear. The family's world tends to be cool-toned, polished, glossy, with harsh clean lighting that makes everything look expensive and emotionally sterile. Sion's inner world, when the show gives it to us, tends to be warmer or dimmer, more shadow, more texture, more human. When the story pivots, those palettes can collide. The show can start putting warmth into the public spaces and coldness into the family spaces, signaling that the moral center has shifted. If the directors did that on purpose, I respect them. If it happened by accident, I respect the accident. Either way, it works. Now, I want to dig into the family's regret, because regret too late can be written in a few different modes, and I think the best mode is the one that doesn't beg for pity. The family should regret it the way someone regrets setting a fire, not because they feel bad for the burned house, but because they can smell the smoke and realize it's on their own clothes. Now, a note about the audience experience: this drama, based on its premise, is designed to make you anticipate a reversal. That means every early humiliation scene is charged with future revenge. You're watching it in two timelines at once, the present scene and the future satisfaction. That's part of the genre's pleasure. But it's also why I said earlier that the drama's best asset is restraint. If it gives you too much early, is secretly powerful, signaling, it reduces tension. If it gives you too little, it risks making him look like a passive victim. The sweet spot is ambiguity, enough hints to keep you curious, not so many that you feel ahead of the story. From what we have in the premise, the show seems to aim for that sweet spot by making his promise the reason, not his weakness. Now, I want to talk about the symbolism of protection again, but in a slightly different way. Protection is also a form of love. It's care. It's shielding. It's taking hits so someone else doesn't. The tragedy is that Sion has been loving people who don't love him back. And that's where the story can feel like a cautionary tale. Love without respect becomes servitude. Love without reciprocity becomes depletion. Love used as a tool becomes exploitation. So when he withdraws protection, he's not just removing strategy. He's removing care. He's turning off the tap. And if the family experiences that as betrayal, it reveals how they perceived his care, not as love, but as entitlement. That's brutal. Now, let's address the possibility of viewers wanting Sion to reunite with his ex-wife after she regrets it. This is always a hot topic in this genre, and I'm going to be gentle because people have different tastes. Some viewers love reconciliation arcs because they believe in second chances. Some viewers hate them because they believe consequences should be final. I'm somewhere in the middle in general. I can love a reconciliation arc if it's earned through deep accountability and change. But earned is doing heavy lifting. A tearful apology is not change. A public embarrassment is not accountability. Change is sustained behavior over time, under pressure, without reward. And in this premise, the wife and the family had 3 years of daily opportunities to behave better. They didn't. So if the drama wants reconciliation, it needs to address that gap honestly. Not with excuses. With accountability. If it doesn't, then a reunion would feel like the drama rewarding cruelty. Now, I'm not saying the show will do reunion. We don't have that info, and I won't invent it. I'm saying, thematically, Too Late Regret leans away from reunion. It leans toward irreversible consequence. And that's why I'm more interested in Sion's personal liberation than in romantic closure. Now, another craft note, the show's emotional impact also depends on how it portrays Sion's protection. If protection is portrayed as something that makes him seem like a secret mastermind, it can become too power fantasy. If it's portrayed as the result of competence, loyalty, and strategic thinking, things he cultivated, it feels more grounded. I personally prefer the latter. I don't want magic influence. I want earned influence. The drama can show that through small references, people defer to him quietly, systems respond to him, he knows information because he paid attention, he has relationships because he treated people decently. Those are believable sources of power. And they fit the theme, the person everyone dismissed was quietly building real strength while they were building image. That's satisfying. Let me rehook you again, because we're circling the big question that determines whether this drama is just entertaining or genuinely good. Does it treat Sion's public truth as the end of the story, or as the beginning of his healing? If the reveal is the peak and everything after is just cleanup, the drama risks being one note. But if the reveal opens new emotional territory, identity, loneliness, rebuilding, then it becomes richer. And rebuilding is the part many dramas skip because it's less flashy. But rebuilding is where the character's growth becomes real. Now, I want to share a more personal confession that watching this premise stirred up, because I think it connects to why these dramas are so popular. I've had friendships where I was the fixer. The one who smoothed over misunderstandings, the one who planned, the one who checked in, the one who remembered details. And it's weird, because being that person can feel like love. You feel needed. You feel useful. You feel like the glue. But then one day, you stop. Not to punish anyone. You're just tired. You stop being glue. And suddenly people act like you changed. Like you abandoned them. Like you betrayed them. They don't say, "Thank you for holding this together." They say, "Why are you being like this?" Watching Sion withdraw protection taps right into that experience. It's the same emotional logic. People normalize what you give until it becomes invisible, and then they resent you for having limits. So on a very human level, beyond plot, this drama scratches at a fear many people carry. If I stop being useful, will I still be loved? Sion's story answers that fear brutally, no, not by these people. And the next question is, what does he do with that knowledge? Now, a lightly humorous aside to keep us from drowning, you ever notice how in dramas like this, the people who say, "We're family," the loudest are often the people who treat family like a hierarchy chart. Like, congratulations on inventing nepotism with extra steps. Anyway, back to the show. The theme of class and hierarchy is not just background flavor here, it's the main weapon the family uses. They look down on Sion because they believe their status gives them moral authority. That's the lie. Status doesn't make you right. It just makes you louder. Sion's public reveal is him taking loudness away from them. He makes the truth louder than their status. And that's why the public aspect is crucial. If he revealed the truth privately, they could bury it. They could silence him. They could bribe, threaten, manipulate. Public truth means the family's usual tools don't work as well. It's not that public truth guarantees justice, but it changes the cost of lying. Now, let's talk about the audience's emotional alignment, because the show wants you on Sion's side, obviously. But alignment becomes more interesting if the show also makes you understand, not sympathize with, but understand how the family rationalizes themselves. Entitled people rarely wake up thinking, "I'm going to be evil today." They wake up thinking, "I deserve." They think they are maintaining standards. They think they're protecting their family's reputation. They think they're being practical. So if the drama writes the family as purely malicious, it becomes simpler but less sharp. If it writes them as people who confuse entitlement with virtue, it becomes a more biting critique. And again, polite cruelty is the perfect vehicle for that. Because it allows characters to hurt others while feeling righteous. That's the most dangerous kind of harm. Let me rehook you again with something that's easy to miss. The public truth reveal isn't just Sion speaking. It's Sion choosing not to protect them from themselves anymore. The reveal is the moment he stops absorbing their mess. That's why it's such a clean moral image. He steps aside, and gravity does the rest. Now, I want to talk about how the drama likely builds tension through inevitability rather than surprise. Some shows try to shock you with twists. This premise doesn't need shocking twists. The satisfaction comes from watching something you know is coming finally arrive. That's like watching a storm form. You see clouds gathering. You feel the air change. You know rain is coming. The pleasure is in the anticipation and in the moment the first drop hits. So the show's job is to make each cloud meaningful. Each humiliation, each dismissal, each reminder of the promise, each moment of Sion's quiet observation, those are clouds. The kick-out is the thunder. The public truth is the rain. And if the show paces that like weather, slow build, then release, it feels natural. Now, I'll touch on something that can go wrong with inevitability stories. If you telegraph too much, the audience gets bored. If you delay too long, the audience gets irritated. The trick is to create smaller payoffs along the way. Not the full reveal, but little shifts. Little wins. Little moments where Sion asserts himself in tiny ways. Those tiny ways matter because they show growth. They also keep the viewer from feeling like they're just watching someone get stepped on for hours. And in the premise, the biggest tiny win is internal. The moment Sion decides, privately, I'm done. That's a win even before anything happens externally. The show should honor that internal win. It should treat it like a turning point, even if the world hasn't caught up. Now, since we're in this final stretch of the script delivery, I'm going to keep deepening rather than wrapping up, because there's more to say about the craft choices that make the premise land. Let's talk about the rhythm of dialogue. Polite cruelty dialogue often has a very specific rhythm: short sentences, indirect phrases, rhetorical questions that aren't actually questions, lots of we language that excludes. We think, we believe, we decided, as if the individual person speaking is just a mouthpiece for a collective. That's how systems speak. They hide behind group identity so no one person has to own the cruelty. Sion's dialogue, in contrast, should shift over time. Early on, he might also use indirect language because he's trying to maintain peace. Later, he might use more direct language because he no longer cares about smoothing things over. That shift from indirect to direct is a sign of liberation. It's not just what he says, it's how he says it. And if you want to see character growth without flashbacks and speeches, watch for directness. Watch for when a character stops qualifying their feelings. Stops apologizing for existing. Stops using maybe when they mean no. Directness is power. Now, here's another slightly contrarian perspective. Sometimes, the most emotionally satisfying consequence for an entitled family isn't public humiliation. It's irrelevance. It's being ignored. It's realizing the world can move on without you. Public humiliation still gives them attention. Irrelevance takes attention away. So if the drama includes any moments where the family's panic is met with indifference, where their usual influence no longer produces immediate results, that will be quietly brutal. Because image-obsessed people fear being forgotten. Sion, ironically, has been treated as forgettable for 3 years. So if he becomes the one who can forget them, that's the ultimate reversal. Now, I'm not saying the drama will go that route, but thematically it fits. Too late regret often ends not with punishment but with distance. The person you hurt doesn't hate you. They just don't care anymore. That's cold. That's also freeing. And I think the show's best possible ending energy, whenever it goes there, would be not, Sion wins and everyone claps, but, Sion is finally unbothered. Not numb. Unbothered. There's a difference. Numb is trauma. Unbothered is healing. Now, I'm going to anchor us back into Sion's promise again, because it's the narrative excuse and the thematic heart. The promise is what kept him in a hostile environment. The promise is what makes him admirable and frustrating. The promise is what gives him a moral compass even when he's being erased. But here's the thing, promises can become an excuse for other people, too. The family might have benefited from his promise without knowing it. The wife might have used his loyalty against him, consciously or unconsciously. People often exploit loyalty because loyal people don't like to leave. So the promise is both a virtue and a vulnerability. And I'm always impressed when a drama allows a virtue to be a vulnerability without mocking it. Some writers treat loyalty as stupidity. This premise treats loyalty as heavy and complicated. That's more respectful to the character. Let me rehook you again. One of the most interesting questions the drama can ask, without ever saying it out loud, is whether Sion's protection was actually a form of control. Protection can be love, but it can also be power. If you're protecting someone, you're also positioning yourself as necessary. And if someone positions themselves as necessary, that can create dependency. Now, do I think Sion is doing that maliciously? Not based on the premise. But it's a nuanced angle. Sometimes, when you become the protector, you also become trapped in the protector role because being needed feels like security. It's possible that Sion's protection gave him a reason to stay, a reason to matter in a house that refused to love him. That's psychologically plausible. And if the drama touches that, even lightly, it makes him richer. It makes him less like a revenge machine and more like a man disentangling from a role that both empowered and imprisoned him. And disentangling is painful. Because when you stop protecting, you have to face the fear that maybe you were only there because of what you provided. Sion's arc, then, is not just, they regret him too late. It's, he stops needing their regret. That's the bigger victory. Now, I want to talk about the camera's relationship to humiliation, because this is a place where dramas can be unethical. You can shoot humiliation in a way that objectifies the victim, lingering on their shame, making it voyeuristic. Or you can shoot it in a way that aligns with the victim, showing their perspective, their emotional experience, their interiority. From the vibe of this premise and how it's likely executed, the best version is the second. The camera should not leer at Sion's suffering. It should witness it with him. It should show the family's cruelty through Sion's eyes, making the viewer feel the discomfort rather than simply consuming it. That's an important distinction. It's the difference between making pain entertainment and making pain meaningful. And if you're a newcomer, you might not consciously notice that, but you'll feel it. You'll feel whether the show is respectful of its character's dignity even when he's being demeaned. Now, sound design again, because I keep coming back to it. Polite cruelty scenes are often quiet, and that quiet allows small sounds to become emotional cues. A fork clinking against a plate. A chair scraping. A door closing. A sigh. Those sounds can become almost violent in their intimacy. The show can use those sounds to make the audience hyper-aware, like Sion is. When you're in a hostile environment, you become sensitive to little cues. You hear tone shifts. You hear footsteps. You anticipate. So if the sound design amplifies those micro sounds, it draws you into his nervous system. It makes you feel the vigilance of endurance. Then, when the public truth reveal happens, the soundscape shifts. Public spaces are louder, more chaotic, less controllable. That noise can feel liberating because it drowns out the family's quiet tyranny. Or it can feel overwhelming because now Sion's life is being consumed by a crowd. Again, public truth is justice and exposure. Now, I want to talk about the regret too late trope and why it's so emotionally potent for viewers. A lot of us carry imaginary scenes in our heads where the people who dismissed us finally realize. Finally apologize. Finally feel what we felt. But real life rarely gives you that scene. People rarely come back with clarity. They often come back with excuses. or they don't come back at all. So dramas like this provide a kind of surrogate closure. They create a world where consequences are visible, where recognition arrives, where the overlooked person becomes undeniable. It's not just about revenge. It's about recognition. And recognition is a primal need. To be seen. To be valued. To be acknowledged. That's why Sion's story resonates. Now, I'll be careful not to preach, but I do want to say, what makes this drama potentially meaningful is not that Sion is secretly powerful. It's that Sion's worth existed before anyone recognized it. The family didn't create his value. They only revealed their lack of it. That's the moral center I hope the show keeps. Let me rehook you again, because we're about to zoom into the emotional mechanics of regret. Regret often arrives in two stages. First, you regret losing the benefit. Then, if you're capable of it, you regret the harm. The family will likely go through stage 1 fast. Stage 2 is the real test of their humanity. And the wife, again, is the most interesting test case. Because her regret, if written well, should be complicated by love, by pride, by shame, by family pressure, by self-justification. She may not even know what she feels at first. She might feel anger because anger is easier than guilt. She might feel denial because denial protects her identity. She might feel panic because panic is about survival. Watching her move through those states, if the drama gives her that depth, could be one of the strongest parts. But it's also where the drama can become manipulative if it tries to force the audience to forgive her without earning it. That's why I keep emphasizing accountability. Regret isn't enough. Regret is emotion. Accountability is action. Now, another little craft observation. The drama's title positions Sion as ex-husband, which suggests the story is told from a point where that relationship is already defined as over. That can create a cool narrative effect. You're watching a relationship die even if the characters don't fully accept it yet. That kind of inevitability can be heartbreaking. Because you can see the end in every early scene. Every small contempt becomes a nail in the coffin. And then, when the kick-out happens, it's not just plot. It's the funeral. That's why I keep using death language. Not because I'm being dramatic for fun, but because, too late, stories are about endings that cannot be undone. Now, I'm going to drop one more slightly funny aside because I can't resist. Families like this always act like they're the only ones with standards, as if kindness is not a standard. Like, congratulations, your standards include table manners and exclude basic empathy. Very classy. Okay. Back. Let's talk about empathy, actually, because Sion's empathy is part of what kept him trapped. Protectors often have high empathy. They anticipate, they absorb, they smooth. Empathy can become self-sacrifice if you don't pair it with boundaries. Sion's arc is empathy learning to coexist with self-respect. That's why the show, at its best, isn't just teaching the family a lesson. It's teaching Sion a lesson too, that being good doesn't require being used. And that's something a lot of viewers need to hear, even if they don't realize they need to hear it. Let me rehook you again with something that might surprise you in your own viewing. You might find yourself, at some point, not just angry at the family, but angry at the world that allowed this dynamic to persist. Because families like this don't exist in a vacuum. They are enabled by social systems that reward status and punish vulnerability. The drama, even if it stays in personal storyland, can still make you feel that broader critique. Now, I want to talk about the moment after public truth, because a lot of dramas deliver the reveal and then struggle with aftermath. Aftermath is where stakes either deepen or deflate. Aftermath should include consequences that feel organic. The family's relationships with others might change. Their confidence might crack. Their internal dynamics might turn on each other because scapegoats are addictive. If Sion is gone, they'll look for a new target. The wife might realize she's not protected by family love either. She might realize her family's affection is conditional. That would be poetic justice. And Sion, in the aftermath, should not instantly be happy. He should feel something complicated: relief, grief, exhaustion, maybe even guilt. Because even when you're right, ending something can still hurt. That complexity is what makes a story linger. Now, I'm going to do something I don't usually do in light spoiler mode, but I'll keep it vague enough. The premise promises a turning point where Sion reveals the truth to the public. The craft challenge is making that reveal not just informative but emotionally irreversible. It has to feel like a door slamming shut, not like a door opening. A door slamming shut means, even if they apologize, the relationship cannot return to what it was. Even if they beg, they cannot undo the public record. Even if they offer him everything, he cannot feel what he felt. That's finality. And finality is where Too Late lives. Let me rehook you again. If the drama is smart, the most devastating line in it won't be a revenge line. It'll be a quiet line where Sion acknowledges that he stayed for a promise, but he will not stay for their regret. That distinction is everything. Now, I want to talk about why the drama's promise concept is such a good narrative device. Promises are emotionally legible. Everyone understands them. Even if you don't know the specific content of Sion's promise, you understand what it does to him. It binds him. It gives him a code. It gives him a reason to endure. Promises also create tragedy, because they can be exploited. The family doesn't necessarily know about the promise, but they benefit from Sion's loyalty. The wife may have assumed he would always be there. The promise makes him predictable. Predictability is useful to exploiters. So when he breaks out, it shocks them because they relied on his predictability. They mistook his loyalty for permanence. That's why loyal people can surprise others when they finally leave. People don't believe you'll actually do it until you do it. And then they are stunned. Not because leaving is unimaginable, but because they built their comfort on your endurance. That's the psychology of Too Late. Now, I'm going to circle back to one earlier critique. Sometimes the family's cruelty can feel too neatly arranged. If the drama leans too hard into everybody is awful, it risks losing nuance. But there's a counterpoint. Sometimes systems really do align. Sometimes groups really do become uniformly cruel because cruelty becomes the group's bonding ritual. They laugh together at the outsider. They share contempt. Contempt becomes social glue. So if the drama portrays the family's cruelty as a group dynamic rather than individual evil, it becomes more believable. It becomes a culture, not a personality. And culture is harder to fight than a single villain. That's why Sion's public truth reveal is such a powerful move. It doesn't just confront a person, it confronts a culture. It puts the family's culture under a spotlight. Now, a cinematography detail that can elevate that. In group scenes, the family might be framed together, unified, symmetrical, while Sion is framed alone, off-center. That visual separation communicates culture. Then later, when the family is unraveling, the framing might break symmetry. People might be framed in isolated close-ups. The group might fracture visually. That's a satisfying visual metaphor. The culture of contempt collapses into individual fear. If the show does that, it's smart. Let me rehook you again with a little viewer psychology. Part of the pleasure of this drama is watching people who weaponize etiquette get trapped by etiquette. In public, they can't scream. They can't slap. They can't openly bully. They have to maintain face. That forces them into a prison of politeness, and Sion can use that against them by speaking plainly while they are forced to smile. That's delicious. That's the kind of dramatic irony that makes you lean in. Now, let's talk about the concept of revealing truth as a form of reclaiming dignity. Dignity isn't just being respected by others. It's respecting yourself enough to tell your story accurately. It's refusing to let others narrate you as less than you are. Sion's public truth is, in that sense, an act of self-respect. It says, you do not get to define me. And it also says, you do not get to hide behind the version of yourselves you sell to the world. That's why the story has such strong momentum. It's not just personal. It's narrative warfare. And narrative warfare is a modern theme. Everyone is fighting to control how they are perceived. The drama taps into that anxiety. What if your reputation isn't who you are, but who you convinced people you are? What happens when someone breaks that illusion? Now, I'm going to slow down and talk about what Sion's life might feel like emotionally during those 3 years, because the premise compresses it into a sentence, but the emotional reality is huge. Living as a looked-down-upon son-in-law for 3 years means living in a constant state of evaluation. Being measured. Being judged. Being compared. Being corrected. Being reminded you're lucky to be there. That constant evaluation erodes a person. Even if Sion is strong, it's exhausting. It turns your home into a stage and your marriage into a performance review. And the worst part is, you start performing without noticing. You start anticipating criticism. You start pre-apologizing. You start shrinking proactively to avoid conflict. So when Sion finally stops, it's not just him standing up to them. It's him unlearning a survival behavior. That's hard. That's why it's meaningful. Let me rehook you again. If the drama wants to really hurt you in the best way, it will include at least one moment where the wife realizes she participated in his shrinking. Not because she was forced, but because she liked the convenience of him being small. That realization, if it happens, is going to be brutal. Now, I'll acknowledge that the premise doesn't give us details about why the wife kicks him out. It could be pride, manipulation, misunderstanding, cruelty, all of the above. I'm not going to invent the reason. But the story's emotional potency depends on it being a choice that reveals her values. Because if it's purely misunderstanding, it becomes less morally sharp. If it's a choice grounded in values, status, pride, image, then her later regret becomes a confrontation with those values. And confronting values is harder than correcting a misunderstanding. Now, I want to pivot into discussing the public aspect from another angle. Public truth can sometimes be a form of protection for Sion against himself. When something is public, it becomes harder to backslide. It becomes harder to return to a toxic dynamic quietly. It creates social friction against reconciliation. That might sound sad, but it can be healthy. Some people need public accountability to avoid returning to the thing that harmed them. Not because they are weak, but because love and habit are powerful. So Sion revealing truth publicly might not just be about punishing the family. It might also be about making it impossible for him to return to being their shield. That's an interesting read. Again, not claiming the show states this, but thematically it fits. Now, let's talk about regret too late as a narrative engine. Regret is not satisfying if it arrives without consequence. You need to see the regret collide with reality. You need to see characters attempt to repair what they broke and fail, not because the plot says no, but because life says no. That's why I hope the drama doesn't allow the family to buy their way out of regret. If they can just restore their image and move on, then the moral is hollow. The premise implies they can't. It implies Sion's protection was essential. That means their fall is structural, not cosmetic. Structural falls are always more satisfying because they feel earned. Now, I'm going to talk about the one thing I want the drama to avoid in its late game, making Sion's victory dependent on the family's validation. If the family finally says, "We were wrong," that's gratifying, yes. But Sion's growth should not require their apology. Their apology should be for them. Sion's healing should come from within and from healthier relationships, even if those relationships are just with himself. If the drama ends up framing the family's apology as the ultimate prize, it accidentally reinforces the family's power. They still get to grant him recognition. The better version is, he recognizes himself, and their regret becomes irrelevant. That's the most powerful reversal. The person you needed validation from becomes someone you no longer need anything from. That's freedom. Let me rehook you again with a slightly different promise. The best part of this story, emotionally, is not the family's downfall. It's the moment Sion stops seeing himself through their eyes. Because that's the deepest revenge. Not harming them. Escaping them. Now, since this is a YouTube drama review script, I also want to talk about who this drama is for, but I'm not going to do the full recommendation wrap yet. I'll just say, if you like morally clear setups with emotionally messy consequences, you'll probably enjoy it. If you hate watching extended humiliation, you might struggle with the endurance phase. That's just the nature of the premise. But again, I'm not closing out, because there's more craft to dig into. Let's talk about the editing of time. The premise spans 3 years, which means the drama has to convey duration. Duration is hard. You can say, 3 years later, but that doesn't make the audience feel it. Feeling duration requires repetition with progression. It requires showing patterns. It requires showing fatigue. It requires showing how relationships calcify. If the drama does that well, you'll feel the 3 years not as a number, but as weight. And weight is important because it justifies Sion's intensity later. It justifies why the truth reveal is not impulsive. It's the result of erosion. Now, here's a subtle thing the drama can do to show weight: make Sion's politeness shift from warm to mechanical. Early politeness might have a softness to it. Later politeness might become a tool. Same words, different temperature. Temperature is storytelling. Similarly, the family's contempt can shift over time. Early contempt might be overt, like, "We don't respect you." Later contempt might be casual, like they don't even think about him when making decisions. That casual contempt is more dehumanizing. It's also harder to fight because it's not even framed as conflict. So when Sion eventually speaks truth publicly, it's not just him responding to cruelty. It's him forcing people to think about him. It's him refusing casual erasure. That's a different kind of power. Let me rehook you again, because I want to make one more surprising point. In some ways, the family's regret is not the most important consequence. The most important consequence is Sion no longer protecting people who don't deserve it, because that means his capacity for care can be redirected toward people who do. The tragedy is wasted care. The victory is reclaimed care. That's a beautiful theme if the drama lets it breathe. Now, I'll pivot to a more technical aspect: lighting. Lighting is a moral language in these stories. Harsh overhead lighting makes faces look unforgiving. Soft side lighting makes faces look vulnerable. If the drama wants to make the family look cold, it can light them in ways that emphasize sharpness, clean, bright, reflective surfaces. If it wants to make Sion look human, it can light him with softer textures, more shadow, more depth. Then, when the public truth reveal happens, the lighting can become even. No one gets flattering light. Everyone is exposed. That's symbolic. Truth equalizes. Truth puts everyone under the same lamp. If the drama's cinematography understands that, the visuals will quietly reinforce the themes without needing dialogue to explain them. Now, I want to talk about the soundtrack again, but from a motif perspective. A motif is a recurring musical phrase associated with an idea or character. In a story like this, the motif might not even be melodic, it might be rhythmic. A low pulse that appears whenever Sion is swallowing humiliation. Then later, that same pulse might appear in public scenes, but now it's triumphant or ominous depending on context. The motif becomes a signal: the endurance has transformed into action. That's satisfying. But if the drama uses generic music cues, sad piano for sadness, angry drums for revenge, it risks flattening the emotional nuance. The premise deserves better. It deserves music that respects ambiguity, that supports mood without telling you what to think. Now, let's talk about what truth might mean thematically, not plot-wise. Truth can mean honesty about who Sion is and what he's done. Truth can mean honesty about the family's dependence. Truth can mean honesty about the wife's betrayal. Truth can mean honesty about the promise and why it mattered. Truth can also mean truth about Sion's own motivations. Maybe he stayed partly for noble reasons and partly because he was afraid to leave. That truth would make him more human. Public truth, then, is not just about external exposure. It can also force internal clarity. When you speak your story out loud, you hear it. You can't hide from your own narrative anymore. That's therapeutic, in a way. It's also terrifying. Let me rehook you again. One of the most compelling arcs the drama can offer is not Sion becomes powerful. It's Sion becomes honest with himself. Power is external. Honesty is internal. External power without internal honesty can still leave you broken. Internal honesty, even without external power, can set you free. The premise gives us external power. I want the show to deliver internal honesty too. Now, I want to address one more common trope in this genre. The late regret often includes the family trying to trap the lead back into the old role by invoking morality. They'll say, "You're a good person, you can't do this," as if goodness means being exploited. They'll appeal to his promise, his loyalty, his image. That's manipulative. And it's realistic. If the drama includes those moral manipulations, and if Sion resists them without becoming cruel, that will be one of the most satisfying forms of growth. Because it's hard for loyal people to resist moral guilt. It's hard to say, "My goodness is not your tool." So watching Sion set that boundary would be powerful. Now, I'm going to admit something else about my viewing experience. I get frustrated with characters who endure too long, not because I blame them, but because I recognize myself in it. I recognize the part of me that used to think endurance was love. So when I watch Sion, I'm not just watching him. I'm watching a version of myself. And when he finally steps away, it feels like vindication for every time I didn't. That's why these stories hit. They are not just entertainment. They're emotional rehearsal. They let you practice leaving. And maybe that sounds dramatic, but that's what good melodrama does. It exaggerates reality so you can feel your own truth more clearly. Now, I'm going to pivot into one more layer of critique, because I want to stay fair. The premise's satisfaction depends heavily on the public believing Sion. If the public is too easily convinced, it can feel unrealistic. If the public is too cynical, it can feel bleak. The drama has to navigate that. One way to do it is to make the truth undeniable. Another is to show that public opinion is divided at first, then shifts as more evidence emerges. Another is to show that the family's enemies seize the opportunity. There are ways to make the shift feel earned without turning it into a procedural. But the key is, the drama should not treat public opinion as a magical moral force. The public is messy. The public can be cruel. The public can victim blame. The public can fetishize scandal. So if the drama portrays the public as purely righteous, it becomes simplistic. If it portrays the public as purely awful, it becomes cynical. The best version is mixed. Some people support Sion, some doubt him, some exploit him, some are just entertained. That mixture would feel real. Again, I'm speaking in terms of what would make the premise land with depth, not claiming the show does all of this. But the premise has room for it. Let me rehook you again with a slightly spicy thought. Sometimes the most satisfying punishment for an image-obsessed family is not public shame, but private collapse. The moment when they are alone, doors closed, and they have no audience to perform for. That's when the mask truly comes off. That's when they show who they are when nobody is watching. If the drama gives us a glimpse of that, family members turning on each other, blaming each other, revealing insecurities, that can be more satisfying than any public scene. Because it shows the rot that was always there. And it also reinforces that Sion was never the real problem. He was just the scapegoat. Now, let's talk about scapegoating, because that's the family's core tactic. Scapegoating is when a group projects its problems onto one person so it can avoid self-examination. Sion, as the low-status outsider, is a perfect scapegoat. If something goes wrong, blame him. If tensions rise, mock him. If someone feels insecure, step on him. When Sion leaves, when he's kicked out, there's a vacuum. The family will either find a new scapegoat or face itself. Most systems choose a new scapegoat. That's what makes them systems. So if the drama shows the family scrambling to reassign blame once Sion is gone, that would be psychologically accurate and narratively satisfying. It would show that their cruelty wasn't personal, it was structural. They needed someone beneath them. And when the public truth exposes that, their entire moral facade collapses. Now, I want to dig into the protection concept one last time from a metaphorical standpoint. Protection can represent emotional shielding. Maybe Sion has been the one preventing conflict, preventing scandals, preventing the family from facing consequences. In that sense, he's been protecting them from growth. Consequences force growth. Without consequences, people remain entitled. So by withdrawing protection, Sion is not only punishing them. He's forcing them into reality. He's forcing them to grow, even if they refuse. That's an interesting moral frame. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop saving people from their own actions. Now, I'm not calling Sion kind in a saintly way. But I am saying his withdrawal can be framed as an ethical boundary that allows consequences to do their work. That's why I keep calling it more like a strike than an attack. Let me rehook you again. Because I want to end this segment on a forward-moving thought rather than a wrap. The drama's true climax, emotionally, is not the public reveal. It's what comes after, when Sion has to live without the role that defined him for 3 years. When he has to wake up and decide who he is without being the family's shield. That's where the story can either deepen into something genuinely moving or flatten into simple victory laps. And that's where I want to stay, because there's so much to explore in how a person rebuilds after being reduced to a role for so long, how they learn to trust their own perception again after years of polite cruelty making them doubt it, how they reclaim softness without becoming naive, and how they carry the memory of those 3 years without letting it turn into bitterness that poisons everything else. Because if the drama understands that healing isn't a trophy you receive after revenge, it's a daily practice you choose after you finally stop protecting the people who never protected you back, then Mantan Suami sang Juru Selamat becomes not just satisfying, but honestly kind of haunting in the best way. And I want to keep talking about that rebuilding process, about the way the show can visually and emotionally represent freedom as something both exhilarating and terrifying, because freedom, after 3 years of endurance, can feel like standing in a wide open field after living in a narrow hallway, and the first thing you notice isn't joy, it's the strange, unsettling silence of no longer being controlled. And that silence is where the real story begins.